My name is Sanbonani. Ninjani. Siyanamukela eKapa namhlanje. Okay? That's for all of you students from around the country, from other SADC countries. Welcome to the Western Cape. I speak Zulu and English, and I was just speaking Zulu if you didn't understand. My name is Janine Ogle, and I am the My Vote Counts National Coordinator. Today we have people from Khayelitsha who are here, who work with the Social Justice Coalition. I'd like to say welcome to you. We also have some activators, which are young people who are members of the organization called Activate. If you Google them, you'll see that they do wonderful work around the country. And also welcome to all the university debaters. And thank you for allowing us this space. I know you're busy, you have your own debates, but thank you for allowing us this hour and for accepting our topic to debate today. Okay. So My Vote Counts is a civil society organization, and we have two objectives. The first is that we want all private political party funding to be transparent. So political parties get money from the fiscus, they get money from government if they are represented in the national parliament and in the provincial parliaments. That money has restrictions. They may only use it on specific things, and they have to report on those funds. But political parties also get money from private individuals. They get money from companies. This is local and foreign. They get money from foreign governments. Okay? And no one knows how much, when, where this money goes. There's absolutely no transparency, and there's no legislation that regulates or governs it. So My Vote Counts feels that there should be legislation that governs private political party funding. Our second objective is that we want electoral reform. Okay? So we want there to be constituency representatives at the provincial and the national parliaments in South Africa. A month ago, we sent prior applications to all the political parties in the National Assembly, telling them to basically show us the money. For the past 5 years, we want to know where you got the money from, how much you got, when did you get it. The deadline is today. We have received 4 responses via email, and we're waiting. The deadline is 12 o'clock. The ones that responded are the DA, the IFP, the AIC, and the Freedom Front Plus.
Thank you very much. Without further ado, I'd like to start the debate. Just to remind the House of some rules, please keep your phones on silent. Remember, you are allowed to ask POIs. Although that's a privilege, please, exercise in some courtesy. Firstly, let's announce the team. From the proposition side, we have Ansuya. Duan van Wyk, UP. We also have Lieto Brega. On the opposition side, we have Elisha from UKZN. University of Stellenbosch. And we also have Yemi Dolutalo. May the best team win. Speech for the proposition of the side of the House, we have Ansuya.
Mr. Speaker and the House at large, the proposition believes in a world where we did not trade a monarchy for economic puppeteers. We believe in a world where democracy matters and where people should have meaningful choice in terms of the vote. That means that they should have full information about why people are not representing their votes. That means that when you talk about a political system that does not serve their votes, it's not because Donald Trump can fix everything and that he doesn't have to be based on facts. It's because people aren't representing the interests that you voted them in for. We need to know who they are representing when they stand up there and tell us that gun legislation is impossible. We tell you, when we talk about private funding, we would include lobbyists, private individuals, and all businesses. We think the influence that they exert on our political processes is one that holds society hostage and one that allows them to have undue influence in terms of who pays the price for these things. We tell you three things. Firstly, that it allows for abuses and corruption. Secondly, that undue political influence is something that we should keep out of our political system in terms of those private entities. And lastly, we tell you about if they make perfect policies and don't act on any monetary incentive to represent someone else, why we don't think that there's any cost associated with that. So firstly, why do we allow for abuse? Why does the system allow for abuses and corruption? We think when we look at systems and why things haven't been passed, there's a number of reasons. Now, some of these might just be government inefficiencies and certain laws are really difficult to pass, but we'd say that there's also a level that is much more nefarious, that allows for people to profit unduly, that allows for people to act on their own personal benefits. So we point to you to examples like Baltimore and Chicago, where it turned out that it was incredibly difficult to remove those housing elements where drug kingpins were actually operating and funding their drug trade. We point you to situations where a number of political parties have been able to fund businesses in South Africa. We point to a number of circumstances where without that information, you can't make a choice that holds them in any way accountable. We think people have the right to know where they're actually getting that money from and who they are representing. Because there's a distinction between whether you just can't pass a policy and whether you're not passing a policy because it benefits you. Secondly, we tell you that there is undue political influence that exists even if people are working throughout the means. Even if they're working through legal channels, there's still absolute power to abuse those legal channels in a number of different ways. We tell you this on three levels. First, we tell you that undue political influence can be shaped in terms of policies, of how people prioritize those policies. We point you to the American political system as a whole, which has unrestricted political donations and allows people to exert undue political influence on their system. If you want to know why gun legislation is so hard to pass, ask the gun lobbyists who fund the majority of politicians who are sitting in your government at the time. If you want to know why it's really difficult to pass medical patent laws, ask the big pharmaceuticals who fund the politicians that are sitting there telling you it is impossible. If you want to know why environmental regulations don't happen and why you have massive tracts of American land flooded, ask the oil companies who fund the kind of discussions and politicians that have those discussions.
Those three examples are all three examples where we do know the funder. Your policy doesn't change that.
In those circumstances, we think it meaningfully changes the discourse when you know who is funding those people, right? We're not saying that we completely fix all of that undue influence, but how bad would it be if you had no idea why that was happening? If you had no idea of the ability to say, you are representing those people instead of representing us. If you don't have that information, you can't exert any political pressure whatsoever. We'd say that we still value a vote, we still value information. So we're not happy to say that we fix everything, but we certainly say that on the comparative, it's far better when we can say you represent these people instead of representing us. We think when we talk about bankrolling campaigns, this is important in terms of who actually chooses to represent you, because a number of people who have access to those funds, who have access to private donations, are the people that you then have to vote for. If you're looking around and thinking there are really bad choices here, why are these people representing me instead of any policies that meaningfully represent me? Maybe it's because they have a whole ton of money from private investors who they do actually represent.
Point?
Yes.
So what actually stops people from actually just privately giving donations and then telling your personal friends that, hey, I gave you this money a while ago, why don't you do these things for me then now?
Okay, so we don't think our burden is to necessarily prove that we can fix every single situation. We think our burden is to prove, your question is whether or not people could pretend that they didn't actually privately donate this. We'd still say on the comparative it's better if you're forced to understand private donations exist. That just concedes that you should have information about private donations. Then we talk about collective discourse. So in this undue political influence, the fact of the matter is when you actually know about those donations, at least you can have a conversation about it. So in another scenario with no information, you don't have any ability to look behind that veil of politics. That makes politics incredibly inaccessible to people who already are losing faith in a political system, are losing faith in the kind of democracies that represent them. Because things aren't changing. The most vulnerable people in those societies are still being harmed. And part of the problem is that powerful people get to concentrate their wealth, get to concentrate their power by implementing policies that benefit them, by implementing policies that actively push people down so they don't have an ability to question that system, to harm that system and say, this is not representing me. When you say that big businesses are more important than these individuals within a society, you say that a democracy is only there to represent those people, is only there to represent those interests. And we'd far rather have a democratic system that actually represents the people than one that simply represents who has the most money. At least under our comparative, even though you may not change private funding, we're very happy to have that debate as well. We think it's an important debate to have. Like, even if you don't change that, at least you get information about that choice. We think that people will feel incredibly betrayed at the point at which you, instead of representing your constituents, represent big businesses and your funders, right? We think it's important to note that very often, all of this analysis tells you that the interests of donors are very regularly prioritized over the interests of regular voters, over the ideals that people enshrine and value, supposedly. When you have to actually practically implement them, I think a lot of people are very happy to say all they care about is continuing to be in power, is continuing to actually talk about the issues that matter most to them. Importantly here, like that betrayal of democratic trust occurs far more regularly when you have no information to hold accountable. So like when you have no ability to change your vote based on that information, we think that's when you get least amount of accountability. We know that democracies don't have perfect accountability, but we definitely should implement policies that at least get closer to that ideal, as opposed to selling democracy out to the highest bidder. We tell you then the government is regularly at odds with businesses. Like very regularly, profit margins are at odds with the most vulnerable groups in society. So it makes sense that people have to pass legislation that annoys the most powerful and most privileged groups in a society. They have to do this all the time. We think we would not compromise social goods and the function of governments itself in order to best achieve some kind of profit margin. So we say that, for example, children being killed by guns all around America because there aren't sufficient gun legislation laws does not help the people who are actually there. We point to you to Bernie Sanders, for example, who did not run with the super PAC, who actively tried to run without that funding and connected with his voters.
House, at 1 minute, POIs are open, and at 6 minutes, POIs close.
Good evening to the House at large. It's a pleasure to be here. Now, I could be wrong, but I just assumed that we're at an event at the South African National University Debating Championships. It's hosted by My Vote Count South Africa and in partnership with Debate Africa. I couldn't be wrong, but I assumed that this was a debate about South African politics. But the previous speech did not have a single South African example, right? And it's easy to guess why, because the government would like to pretend that this is about the United States, whose political system is absolutely insane, and ignore the fact that the only South African examples they'll be able to give you are things which are already illegal. So like things like the Guptas allegedly like influencing the placement of ministers and that sort of stuff. That stuff that's illegal in the status quo. So if we're able to like get that sort of stuff and able to prosecute them, that's something that's already covered for. This debate is not about that, right? What this debate is about is whether any individual who wants to engage in the political process by sending money to the party that they support, or even any business which believes that this party best represents our interests, whether they should be able to do so, and not about whether or not we support corruption or American style like plutocracy. I'm just gonna... Sure.
So if you know where the money comes from, where the money goes, for example, if you look at the Guptas, if we had seen all the contributions they were giving over the previous times, we would have been able to preempt that they're going to do something bad. We wouldn't have had
No, but like the exact point is that if what you're talking about is fraud, and fraud is going to be hidden anyway, right? They're going to hide it even when you pass this law. This is about the legitimate flow of money. This is about legitimate donations and whether or not we should ban that. But like, distinctions between our system and the American system is that, like, firstly, the American system of politics just has much more money because their elections are much more expensive. And when you ask yourself what the majority of that money would actually be spent on, is things like advertising. Billions and billions are spent on like negative ad campaigns, and those are the sorts of things we just don't have in South Africa in the first place. But also in the American system, you have a more direct system where first past the post representation means people aren't appointed by the party. You're able to have lobbyists just directly buying candidates and getting that vote in Senate in that sort of way. So you can see how money would be a lot more harmful in that system than it is in ours. But what we're actually just talking about is whether or not you get to pick the party which best represents your ideology. Now that that's clear, right, what I'm going to be talking about in this speech is two things. The first thing I'm going to be speaking to you about is why this is actually a limitation of a democratic right you have to participate in the political system, and why that right is a right to participate confidentially. The second thing I'm going to speak about is why this is going to lead to less money for parties and why that's bad for everybody involved. And then Neil is going to give you at least 5 reasons that this information is actually in many ways not as useful as the government would like to pretend. But I just want to point out one more thing, which was a huge problem with Ansuya's speech, is that she sort of just tells us that information is always helpful and information is power, and that it's important to be able to at least have the conversation to keep them accountable. But that assumption is that this is relevant information, that this is good information, and this is the sort of information that's going to lead the conversation in the right direction. What we're going to tell you is that this is information which is simplistic and information which ignores the important considerations of why people are donating this money and what the parties are actually doing with this money in a valuable way. So, moving on with it. Why do we think that people actually donate to political parties in the first place? People donating to political parties in the form of money is actually no different to people voting for specific political parties or engaging directly with that democratic system. Why? Because the way in which people support certain political parties is, for instance, if you have the benefit of being unemployed, then you can donate your hundreds and hundreds of hours to campaigning on behalf of the political party, going door to door, knocking, informing people, writing, spreading your opinion as far as you can, and participating to the best of your ability and trying to get more people on your side. What does money do in a political process? It does exactly the same thing. It ensures that people are able to buy advertisements. It ensures that people are able to I'll take you in a second, Brigger. It ensures that people are able to actually provide food and things like that for political rallies. But the difference is that there are a lot of people who have the money to be able to contribute but don't have the same amount of time or don't have the same amount of writing ability to spread their political will. So, which is why, in most instances, you don't have a limitation on private funding, because private funding is political expression. Yes, Rick.
So, Eli, you're telling me my 5 hours of community work door to door are equal to the 100 million that Gupta's give to the ANC? Well, why aren't I 100 million land richer then?
No. Well, but the point is, on your side, the Guptas are still allowed to give 100 million to the ANC, right? But it's the point is that being able to give what you can, being a legitimate expression of being a legitimate political expression on your part. But the reason that it's important for that to be confidential is that you're not freely engaging in a political system if there are negative consequences for that engagement, which is why votes are confidential, which is why you don't allow people to reveal who they voted for on the ballot box, because if the party could now retaliate against them and say, you didn't vote for us, or why don't you go to the people you actually voted for, or that sort of intimidation, then it wouldn't be free engagement with the political system at all. So in as far as we think that people have the right to make donations, and they're not actually proposing taking away donations, they're just saying you should know, we don't think that it is free in the instance where people can now be subjected to coercive factors or being threatened in order to be able to access that political right. But also, in the instance where you now have less money, it's going to mean 2 things. Number 1, it's going to mean that parties can't campaign as effectively, which means that the most entrenched, biggest parties will automatically win the vote, or that people aren't able to be exposed to ideas as much as possible. And if that happens, that also suppresses democracy. For these reasons, we're very happy to.
So it's extremely ironic that Elijah can come up and talk to us and tell us how we're not bringing up any relevant South African examples. He fails to do so as well in his 7-minute speech. We tell you why, because currently South Africa doesn't actually know exactly who are funding the political parties. That's extremely harmful, hence why my vote counts is here today, right? So that's what we're sort of looking at. So we get this main question coming from him, and the main question coming from the proposition side is, so if you think that people care about the ANC's alleged corruption scandal, if so, then it's clearly relevant info. People deserve to know then who is funding that party. People then deserve to know who is actually behind the party's policies, because that's ultimately what happens. That's what I'll be proving in my speeches today. Ultimately, the harm that it actually has on the communities as a whole when parties are funded by private enterprises, and then also the harm it eventually entrenches in terms of the international community and going forward. So we first go look at one few points of rebuttal where Elijah was mentioning that if anybody wants to donate, no matter how much, they can. But there's a certain point, and us as the proposition, I'll sort of bring it out, is at a certain point you reach an amount of money where it stops becoming a donation and it now starts becoming some level of undue influence. Hence why we see sort of in the United Kingdom, hence why you see in Germany, once they reach a barrier of about 7,500 euros, then you have to politically disclose it in your referendums at the end of your campaign so that people know exactly who is funding this political campaign, when this money is coming from, and whether those political campaigns are actually being represented by people who represent the people's interests, right? So we come to you, we tell you, if we knew that the Guptas were doing exactly what they were doing at a stage, you would have either had a point of discourse where you wouldn't have allowed the ANC to go forward with their matters because of what was in the long term, like detriments that was going to have. But secondly, the ANC could now then just be like, well, you guys knew the Guptas were going to do all of this stuff, you must now just deal with it. It's two situations like that we see eventually happening, right? So when we go look at sort of the harms you end up having in terms of like the harm it has on people by us not knowing exactly who funds political parties, we see it being, it re-entrenches this idea of like inequality and poverty in the long term, because you constantly see political parties rather entrenching people and appeasing their funders instead of their voters, and that's a problem.
If this didn't lead to corruption or poverty or inequality, would you still be supporting this?
So it's a model you try and propose in a hypothetical situation, but yes, we would still propose that we see exactly who is funding these political parties, right? So when you have a political party not actually being represented, even though they give large donations, we don't see them actually wanting to partake in that party, right? So you see like gun control lobbyists, you see tobacco companies in the United States and everything. The only reason why they donate to certain political parties is because they can get sort of referendums passed that will favor them in the long run and actually just go against everyone else in the country and those political interests, right? So we see that's the extreme like problem that you have over there. So what does this actually like entail? So the harm of that is that people's needs are now negated to satisfy the pockets of the political parties that are in the country. We see that is extremely problematic, right? We see that when the Gupta families, they're getting tenders upon tenders upon tenders upon tenders, instead of people who actually deserve those tenders. Why? Because they're giving large amounts of money to the ANC. They're not getting this money. The ANC will make sure everything slides under the radar. The Guptas get what they want to, yet the average man is busy suffering on the street. We see that as an extremely like serious problem that needs to be dealt with. It would have been dealt with in a better way if we had some form of like transparency that took place, if they were able to disclose. Rough. Can we get a mic? Okay, so just to clarify quickly, you're saying the problem is with the policy and not with the money?
The policy making system, not with the money scheme.
Okay, so you're saying the policy-making system is the problem, not where the money's coming from. But what ultimately affects the policy-making system, it's where the money ends up coming from, right? So when the Guptas want a certain policy passed and they give extra money to do that, then the policy system is obviously inadequate. We're not seeing like a proper political due process occurring. No, let me just move on with my speech. So we also have this thing where like people deserve the right to know why they also find themselves in a certain situation, right? So when we see the lobbyists and the financial companies that sort of were behind the whole thing with Brexit and Boris Johnson, right? We feel that people deserve the right to understand why they find themselves in a certain situation because of like the private backing that political parties end up having, and we see that that's a problem. So it's just like this whole entire thing of just people's priorities in the country are being negated at the expense of the funders that are actually funding these political parties. Sam?
So if monetary influence is your fundamental problem, you also then sensationalize advertising.
So we find with advertising during campaigns, because they're not directly affecting the policies of the political parties, right? They're just endorsing a political party. We see that as like a completely legitimate process, right? So if the Guptas want to have like one of their companies completely advertise for the ANC, we see that that is fine. We see that that is like a legitimate solution to have, right? But we don't see it as like a sufficient policy where the Guptas directly go to the ANC and they tell them, listen here, we need this, this, and this passed in the constitution so that we can have this, this, and this, and then legitimately going through. We feel that undermines a democracy. You're literally then buying a democracy in the country, and that's a negative aspect, right? So when we go sort of, if we have to give you an example of sort of the pipeline system that you have in African American communities in the United States, they completely like disenfranchised because the parties passed legislation to not have those pipelines working in prisons. Therefore, you see those communities suffering even to a larger extent. So in summation, we can sort of take you from the proposition house where it brings about a doubt about the moral integrity of the financing in the campaigns if we don't see who's actually exactly behind the political funding. It encourages corruption and a complete like misuse if you don't understand exactly like the checks and balances of who's giving what, where the money's coming from, what they actually represent. It also reduces the confidence that you actually now have in this democracy. If you end up actually disclosing this information, and that's sort of what Elijah was leading to towards the end, if we actually now disclose this information, what will it bring about? Some level of transparency and integrity in the constitution, in the democracy that we have, some level of trust, right? You'll also be able to control the corruption, you'll be able to increase that accountability in a larger sense, right? So he also came up in his last little bit there of rebuttal where he was like, oh no, but now if they don't have the money, how will the political parties get a campaign? Bernie Sanders was able to do it without those financial backings. He just used like minor donations where people actually really work there.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to welcome the next speaker. Just to note to the speakers, we've asked them to reduce their time to 5 minutes. We'll play it safe. We'll ask you to sit down at 5.5. Thank you. Sorry, I'm sorry. It's one of those things. Sorry.
A good 5 minutes is enough.
Elisha was a bit optimistic about my 5 points, so I only have 4. Okay, we do actually have to, go back to just like really stressing the fact that their policy doesn't ban funding, because I mean all the examples that they're talking about, right, are like really unscrupulous organizations like the NRA and like what oil companies and I don't know what all. And like it's important to realize that when you put in place a policy that, like as Elisha explained, makes a situation where people who don't want to be associated with things that could damage their reputation, they don't want to fund anymore, you're changing who funds, right? In particular, you're making it really not in the interests of people who do care about their reputation to fund. Whereas like the assholes, they're not going to care anyway. You're just limiting the funding to precisely the people you don't want to fund political parties, right? That's the effect of the policy that they're putting forward. And insofar as that information doesn't allow you to deal with the problems of incentives, like you're just putting incentives on the stage to care about people like the National Rifle Organization, like the Guptas, like whoever it is, right? The only people who are going to engage in political funding now under their policy are precisely the organizations they have a problem with, right? So it's not just a question of them only going halfway, but they're making things substantively worse in the process by the way that they've misread the situation. Alright, I want to just do a little bit more defense then as well of what Elijah spoke about how funding is actually a part of the democratic process, because that's sort of been missed, right? It seemed to be in conflict here. And I think the important thing to stress is that like a lot of campaigning is just about like having lots of friends and like knowing lots of people, and rich people don't do that sort of stuff. They have like high walls and they live in gated complexes and whatever. So there's definitely a deficit there insofar as the only asset that they have available in the absence of having any friends is using their democratic power in this way, and we think that's legitimate. Alright, cool. So now for my definitely more than 5 reasons, I'm going to tell you 4 reasons why the issue here that they're addressing is not the relevant one. It's not actually something that matters very much at all. And the first thing I just need to stress here is like, people who fund political parties always fund them all. Like they fund both sides, right? So like the Guptas funded the DA as well. Incidentally, that caused a lot more discourse than your policy is going to, right? That's really the sort of leaks that you want to have and that's what you're interested in, right? But what that means is that when you reveal that information, it doesn't really help you much because everyone's getting the money, so what do? You can't change your votes as a result of that, right? So that sort of process is one that is problematic when generally the way people fund, because like in Parliament, even if you lose, you still have a seat, right? So they want to fund everyone who has a vote in Parliament, so they fund everybody. There's no real choice that results when that happens, so that's not particularly helpful. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, isn't that exclusive to what Elijah said in terms of it's a way of politically voicing what it is?
In the case of individuals, right? But in the case of precisely the people that the policy is excluding, right? The organizations that their policy isn't excluding, it doesn't affect. So that's actually just another reason why their policy is getting to the wrong people. Thank you for that. Alright, so then the second thing to point out over here is that generally when you have leaks of, or not leaks, but publishing of information with very big numbers on it, is like people don't read that stuff, it's kind of boring, right? So like, classic example of this is the Panama Papers, which are thousands of lengths, I'll get to you in a second, thousands of lengths long, but like nobody reads that stuff. And I'm going to explain the problem that, but like,
do you like information? Is it important to you? And do you think it's important to people who vote?
I don't like too much information. Let me just finish that point. So what happens when you have large amounts of information that's too boring to read, right, is it has to be filtered through the media. And that's why, for example, in the case of the Panama Papers, the biggest person that you saw in the news following that was Vladimir Putin, right? He wasn't even in those things. Because the media takes information and they make with it what they want to. That's particularly going to be an issue in South Africa, where all of our media is centralized and owned by people who generally aren't in favor of progressive policies. Is the sorts of information that you're getting, and thank you, the sorts of information you're getting is going to be filtered through a process where what actually reaches people and what they're actually able to act on is not representative at all of what that information actually made, right? This is how you get to information forming sort of battering rams. We don't think that's very useful. Next thing I'm going to tell you, and this will probably be the final one because time, even though it's only 3, is that actually in South Africa, the biggest democratic process, especially because we do have single party dominance, is between elections. It's not at elections themselves. It's situations like, for example, taking policies to the court. It's, for example, going to public hearings. It's stuff like that, right? Participatory processes that we have a lot of in South Africa. Another big difference with America, they don't have those sort of participatory democratic processes. That's where the real decisions are actually made in this country, and you divert attention away from that. We know that people have short attention spans, so you need to decide what you're going to feed them, and you feed them the wrong information. So I think they make the situation much worse because they encourage assholes to fund political parties. They make it difficult for people with genuine interests to fund political parties. We think they misunderstand democracy, and they think they skew the issue onto the wrong thing. Thank you.
Thank the Speaker of Afrika as will speak.
voters are stupid. Don't give them too much information because they're only so lazy that they read newspapers that feed them trash, because newspapers are exactly that. They hate progressive government because progressive government protects things like media integrity and all of that. So they'll try to sabotage those governments and lead them into dictatorship because that's what they actually like, right? That's what we're just told. And no, I asked a simple question. Who likes information? Because this is what this motion is about. Should you be informed? And if you want to be informed, do you have the option of that information? He then told us about leaks, right? And I'm glad that you told us about leaks, because that means that people want the information, right? If a legal firm could circumvent its ethics, right, could risk the license of the people working there to leak the Panama Papers, it means that people want to know what is happening in those papers. They want to know what happens. So what we're doing is just bringing things into the light. And you're saying people, some companies don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to be associated with things that are bad, so they might back out, and people might not be able to campaign effectively. Listen, if a company is going to be embarrassed by something, we're saying please leave. If that person is embarrassing you, please leave. If you're McDonald's and that person doesn't want to move away from gun violence because McDonald's needs people eating things and not dead people, so you need to move away, right? So you then can't put that metric. If you see how much power lobbyists have and what destabilization it brings, right? The example of America, and I'm going to come to South Africa because they obviously want it. The example of America, right? In America, they don't want to ban guns, right? They don't want to have solid gun legislation. Kids now, 58 kids currently are dead through accidental gunshots, right? So now, but Kinder Toy is banned in America because companies that give meals with toys have the incentive to pressure those politicians to give their policies things that come through, but the McDonald's has the proxy to stand away when people are killing each other in communities where they own stores on the corners, right? We're saying that's not right? And if McDonald's is supporting people who are supporting gun violence, then people who eat the black people in their community whose cousin just got shot on the corner can't go eat at that McDonald's, right? And they have the right to know that if they want to know it, right? So Eli, tell me.
If I support a political party because of their economic policy, but their politicians keep saying incredibly embarrassing things about race and social issues, why should my...
Don't vote for them. This is why intelligent people in this country and everywhere around the world make this nice term called intersectionality, right? I can't then only focus on my own problems, right? If I then like guns, but I hate when people call some people the N-word or the K-word, I shouldn't stick with those people because they like guns like me. Because if then the association of liking guns is there, then liking to call people bad words is there as well. Leave that relationship, right? So what are we talking about, right? We're talking what these people do to make their means. They're using people as means to get money, right? And we're saying, like in South Africa, we can only bring you the Guptas. They're the only example because they got leaked. We know nothing about anybody else who invests in the ANC. We know nothing about anyone who invests in the Freedom Front Plus. So we can't meaningfully engage those conversations here. That is why this campaign is there. That's why this campaign is going to the courts and trying to get us that information. There are people who don't care about that information. It's fine, don't read it. We're not saying we're going to distribute it into mailboxes. We're saying if you want to read it, here it is. Something like the Auditor General's report, right? Not all people can read it, but those who can want to and engage positively with it. If you don't want information, it's fine. You can opt out of reading information. But we're saying we want information because that information informs not only what if that party wins, but it informs my life for the next 5-6 years. So I should be able to know exactly what is driving their motivations. And listen, it's not about friends and campaigns. It's not about door-to-door campaigns. I go door-to-door for the ANC every day. But when the Guptas give them 100 million rand, the Guptas are going to be the priority. the Gupta's requests are gonna be higher than mine. So you should then be able to know that I'm not gonna go door to door anymore.
So what Brina fails to accept is whilst 100 million rand could make your eyes pop. Because at the very best, we think that this is going to buy a big guy like Zuma in the ANC and perhaps a Brina, right? But it won't buy the entire organization and change the democracy that we live in because it's a robust democracy in the first place, right? So let's go and dissect the state that we live in, which is South Africa, and not look at like tedious or like irrelevant examples such as America, which we all concede already screwed up, right? So we think that when we look at the way elections take place and how power is acquired in this country, when we look at how people gain seats in parliament and how people actually win municipal elections, to the largest extent, the majority rules. We think that that adds a lot of value in terms of the discussion and the kind of influence that government wants us to believe exists in today's debate, right? We think that this influence, at best, can encourage, in fact, translate into criminal activity. And because our democracy is robust, in the instance where this is true, we can deal with it. We can deal with it in our judiciary system, but we can also deal with it like democratically, like and engage with the fact that like the Guptas are screwed up and we're tired of their planes landing, right? But then that's why this debate isn't about that influence, because that influence isn't necessarily true in the context of a robust democracy such as South Africa. And so the debate then becomes, what are the consequences and what do they mean to the people that we should be caring about when we do release this information? Because I like Rob, I'm taking him.
There's no such thing as free lunch. And that's because they want to know, why are you funding us?
So this is the thing, right? And this is the problem with this line of argumentation, which is the problem that we get with the proposition case, is that the premise is, if I am funding you, then I've got an ulterior motive, right, to it. So this idea of not having a free lunch is primarily problematic, not in the case of the ANC, but in the case of Acham, in the case of COPE, and I'm going to engage on what this means in terms of their engagement in the democracy and their campaigning capacity in the landscape in the interest of creating a robust democracy, right? Because we live in this society where if the millionaire of Noluthando Yeni is found on a list that funded, or rather the trillionaire is found on the list to have funded $1 million to Acham, to DA, or the ANC, forgetting that that's probably 0.01% of their net worth, right? But because $1 million is such a big number, we're going to assume or make conclusions that aren't necessarily true about the intentions of Noluthando in that engagement, right? We think this is particularly harmful when we saw Acham actually disclose their private funders and how that crippled how they engaged in our democracy, a very serious contender in our democracy, a woman who had very, very valuable input to the landscape of this country was crippled in an election because, amongst other reasons, she disclosed, was the only person who disclosed her private funders. We think in South Africa, considering that we exist in a robust democracy, this isn't necessary because the way up against the pros and possible harms or possible intentions that funders may have, because we're scared, those are harmful. So we think that for small parties such as Acham, when you're competing against an ANC that has a legacy behind it, it is very important for you to have access to a lot of funding, for you to have a meaningful engagement in today's democracy. And I think Wits can relate to this really well. When we consider the rise of Project W in that institution, right, they were only able to meaningfully engage with the PYA when they were dishing out free cars, dishing out emerging parties in order for them to meaningfully engage in the democracy at campaign phase. And it's something that we can't now remove because we think that there's a corrupt incentive just because someone funded a big number that we aren't used to because we're black. But So, at the end of the day, when Riga comes to us and tries to paint the picture that like political parties have to be perfect, right? So, someone's racist, but I agree with their economic policies. Removing the right for me to express my support just because I'm focusing on the imperfections.
Thank you very much. We'd like to thank all our speakers. Now the time has come for you, the audience, to decide who wins, either the proposition team or the opposition team. We will do this by a round of hands. So, if you believe the proposition team has taken this debate, please raise your hand. Thank you. If you believe the opposition team has taken the winner is the opposition team. Thank you very much for engaging. Please give us a call at My Vote Counts or at Debate Africa. Thank you.